Hello everybody and welcome back to Art Appreciation. This is our last module for the semester. Yay! This one will be in two parts. We are going to cover a pretty large chunk of time. So we're going to start with the late 18th century and then work our way to modern day. So we're going to be covering a large amount of time. But this is our last lecture. If you haven't already, go ahead and start working on your final project. You have had access to it most of the semester, but go ahead and look at it, start working on it. That way, if you have any questions, you can ask me and you have time to ask me and get help and a response back. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email. Also, as always, make sure all of your notes are in one single document. Distinguish, say, part 1, put all your notes for this lecture, part 2, and then for the second part. So, before we really get into the material, we need to understand what was happening at this period of time. So again, for this part, we're going to talk about late 18th to 19th centuries. So the period of time that we're talking about was happening during the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was characterized by a shift to a more rational and scientific approach to the world. So during the Enlightenment, we see more scientific discovery, innovation, and study. We also see a rise in individualism and artistic creative freedom. This is reflected in the art, where we saw beauty for beauty's sake depicted in Baroque and Rococo art. Previously, we now shift to art as study for a purpose. We also see innovations in art, such as invention of photography and experimentation in art, such as the rise of Impressionism. A lot of art at this time was shaped by the French Revolution. So remember, we talked about last time, Rococo and Baroque. It was beauty for beauty's sake. It was beautiful, it was expensive, it was wealthy, it was gaudy. The everyday people were starving in the streets. So we have the French Revolution, and that really leads to a more scientific approach, even to art. So first, we're going to talk about neoclassicism. One of the things that we need to talk about before we talk about neoclassicism is from this point onward, a lot of the styles of art and the types of art that we talk about are actually happening simultaneously. Instead of we've been moving pretty linear through time with styles until this point. So when we hit really the late 18th century, so that's the late 1700s, we see a shift. So people, we have different things happening at the same time. So we have neoclassicism happening at the same time that we have Impressionism. And the Impressionists are practicing at the same time the Post-Impressionists are practicing. We don't see an end of a style and a beginning of a new style coming the way we sort of have in the past. All of this is happening simultaneously. We still have neoclassicist art being made today. And it still continues on from the 17th century neoclassicism. So, even during the late 18th century and the 19th century, we see artists looking back to classical Greece and Rome. So we saw it in the Renaissance. We're seeing it again at this period of time. This is after the Renaissance has ended. We went from Renaissance to Baroque and Rococo art, and now we're back looking to the classical past. So this is the Oath of the Horatii. We talked about this one briefly when we talked about composition, or maybe not briefly, but we've talked about it before. It's just been a minute. But the Oath of the Horatii depicts a scene from a Roman legend about a 7th century BC dispute between two warring cities, Rome and Alba Longa, and stresses the importance of patriotism and masculine self-sacrifice for one's country. Instead of the two cities sending their armies to war, they agree to choose 3 men from each city. The victor in that fight will be the victorious city. From Rome, 3 brothers from the Roman family, the Horatii, agree to end the war by fighting 3 brothers from a family of Alba Longa, the Cariati. The 3 brothers, all of whom appear willing to sacrifice their lives for the good of Rome, are shown saluting their father, who holds the swords out to them. Of the three Horatii brothers, only one will survive. However, it is the surviving brother who's able to kill the other three fighters from Alba Longa. He allows the three fighters to chase him, causing them to separate from each other, and then in turn kills each Curiati brother. Aside from the three brothers depicted, David also represents in the bottom right corner a woman crying while sitting down. So see her over here. We see all of the women sort of in distress, but she is more focused on, and there's a reason for that. She is Camilla, a sister of the Horatii brothers, who is also betrothed to one of the Curiati fighters, and thus she weeps in the realization that whatever happens, she will lose someone that she loves. Seeing her weep, the surviving brother, Publius, kills Camilla for weeping over the enemy. The principal sources for the story behind David's oath are the first book of Livy, sections 24 through 26, which is elaborated by Dionysius in book 3 of his Roman Antiquities. So this comes from a Roman book. However, the moment depicted in David's painting is his own invention. So this painting led to the popularization of the Roman salute. Have that arm raised up. So we have a lot of depictions of classical stories. We do also see that classical architecture. We have arches, we have Doric columns, we have that stonework. Even then, it's depicted sort of in ruins because this is how they would see the Roman art at this time. It's been centuries since Rome existed, and really since it was at its peak. So we would see sort of this facade coming off of things at this point. We also see neoclassicism in architecture. So this is an American example. This is Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. You can visit Monticello today if you would like. Jefferson designed the main house using neoclassical design principles described by Italian Renaissance architect Andrea Palladio. He reworked the design through much of his presidency to include design elements popular in the late 18th century Europe and integrating numerous ideas of his own. So we can see the use of Doric columns on the front. These do have a base in the more Roman style. We have a frontal pediment. So if you remember the Pantheon, we even have that stepped dome with an oculus at the top. We have dentils. They're just edited a little bit. They don't look exactly the same as those Roman dentils do. The house itself actually sort of has that basilica style. So it has the central area with two wings. But then it's America with this red brick. This red brick is sort of characteristic of American architecture. We call this the colonial style, which there's variations within that. So the neoclassical style came out of a need to establish governments as strong in a time when the United States government was just beginning and the French government had just gotten rid of corrupt, frivolous leaders. So we need strong governments. We need interpretations of strong governments. And the last, or the most famous strong government is Rome. Next, we have Romanticism. So again, this Romanticism is happening at the same time as Neoclassicism. Romantic artists believed that emotion was more important than reason. They celebrated everyday people and depicted nature, rural life, common people, and exotic subjects in their art. So here we have Francisco Goya's The 3rd of May. We looked at the 3rd of May and the 2nd of May in Module 1, so it's been a minute. But this is an example of Romanticism. This painting, the unarmed men are being led in front of the line of gunmen to be executed. And so we have emotion, we have fear, we have strength, we have determination being shown. This man's covering his face in fear. We have people cowering down. Even in the background, people covering their faces and weeping. All of the soldiers have their heads bowed down. They're not actually even looking at their targets. So this piece was a commemoration of the event, as well as a political statement about the atrocities of the rule of Napoleon. So even then, it's still a depiction of the everyday people. Another example is Joseph Mallard William Turner. This is The Slave Ship, or Slavers Throwing Overboard the Dead and Dying, Typhon Coming On. And it dates from 1840. Romantic paintings tended to have an interest in current events instead of an interest in mythology or the past. So Goya's painting and this painting by Turner are both examples of this. Works of romantic art tend to have looser brushstrokes to express emotion. And Turner was really known for his loose brushstrokes. His often creates this sort of swirling, chaotic effect. During the time this painting was created, there were several occurrences of shipwrecks and other cruel occurrences involving slave ships. Some believe this painting was inspired by the story of the slave ship Jeanne in The History and Abolition of the Slave Trade by Thomas Clarkson. The event told in this story is known as the Jeanne Massacre. More than 130 enslaved Africans were killed and thrown overboard by the crew of the ship in the days following November 29, 1781. It was common business practice. They had taken out insurance on the lives of the enslaved Africans as cargo. According to the crew, when the ship ran low on drinking water following navigational mistakes, the crew threw enslaved Africans overboard. The insurance companies refused to pay, and court cases took place to determine whom was at fault and liable. This opened up a discussion about the morality of the slave trade in England. And this discussion opened up some rights for slaves and eventually helped lead to the abolition of the slave trade in England. So this painting was meant to evoke a sympathetic emotion for the slaves and give a sense of the chaos of the event, just of throwing people overboard. We see red flashes in the water. We see chains rising up and hands rising up. We see the fish coming in to feed. We see birds coming in. It's really devastating. And at first, you don't really notice. You see all this swirling event. It makes you think of wind and rain. Maybe a sunset with this yellow. And then you see the ship. And then you start noticing those other little details that make it much, much more morbid. But that's romanticism. It focuses on real people, real events, and really gives it this drama. An American example is Thomas Cole. This is the Oxbow, or a view from Mount Holyoke, Northampton, Massachusetts, after a thunderstorm. This is a seminal landscape painting by Thomas Cole. He was founder of the Hudson River School. This painting depicts a romantic panorama of the Connecticut River Valley just after a thunderstorm. It's been interpreted as a confrontation between wilderness and civilization. So we have the thunderstorm coming this way. We have wilderness here. We have forest. We have trees, broken trees even, damaged trees. It's very thick and wild and untamed. We have birds flying up. But then on the opposite end of that, where the clear sky is above, we have fields. You can see designated different fields where things are being grown. The trees are trimmed back. We have smoke coming up from houses. We have boats on the river. So we have sort of tame land versus wilderness. The Hudson River School was a group of artists that worked within a similar style of landscape painting, and their landscape painting was inspired by Thomas Cole. Another example of romanticism was Eugene Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. We've talked about Delacroix's painting before. It was painted after the French Revolution as an ode to the people who fought for a better government. This painting, again, is an example of the Romantic style. It depicts everyday people and current events, even though it still shows the mythical personification of France. So we have Marianne. But we also see those loose brush strokes that we talked about before. And we have those everyday people, current events. Next, we have realism. So realism is a style that focuses on ordinary people, ordinary existence. There's no idealism, no exoticism, no nostalgia. It's just everyday people doing everyday things and everyday events. Realist art, sometimes it shows like nitty-gritty things. Shows you the things that you typically wouldn't see painted. It's not afraid to show the wrinkles and the ugliness of people in life. Realism comes out of photography. We were able to capture true images of things without editing to make things ideal. So then we start to see that reflected in painting. This is The Stormbreakers by Gustave Courbet. We actually don't have this painting anymore. We only have pictures of it, ironically. We have photographs of the painting inspired by photography. It was destroyed during World War II. It was damaged in the bombings and destroyed. But we do have photos of it, so we still have images. This painting was first exhibited in 1850 in the Paris Salon. It depicts a young man and an old man breaking rocks and was meant to display the hard labor peasants endured. The faces of the figures are not depicted because they're meant to represent the everyman. Everyone who views the image can put themselves into the scene because the specific identity of the figures are not depicted. So realism focuses on everyday people, everyday things. Next, we have Impressionism. Impressionists work to portray contemporary life. They work to create impressions of what they saw, not exact replicas of what they saw. A lot of Impressionists were inspired by Turner's landscape painting, so we see those very loose brush strokes. But it's more of, think if you squint and turn your head sideways kind of thing. We get an impression of what an actual image looked like, an actual scene looked like. So this is Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise. This painting's credited with inspiring the name of the Impressionist movement. The Impressionists worked during the first stages of color theory. They learned from direct observation and from studies in physics that we see light as a complex of reflections received by the eye and reassembled by the mind during the process of perception. I know that's a lot of words. Basically, light comes into your eye. It hits the cones in your eye. Light comes from the sun, hits an object. Some of the light is absorbed, some of it's reflected back into your eye. And then what's reflected back into your eye is perceived by the cones in your eye, interpreted by your brain so that you see that color. So different colors being mixed together make different things. Sort of that play with what reflections are coming back to you. Again, a lot of scientific innovation happening at this time, including theories on color. Impressionists often laid in colors, often complementary colors, side by side to create vibrations in the painting, to draw the viewer in. So we see the use of complementary colors because that's what our eye sort of, they contrast with each other. So it draws our eye to that contrast. So here we have orange and blue. So orange for the sun, the reflection on the water. We have this blue fog, and we have little bits of orange mixed in to create shading. Next, we have a Renoir painting. Both Monet and Renoir painted at this location. It's a scene of a restaurant on the water. I'm not even going to butcher the title of this, just for everyone's sake. But we see the depiction of everyday life in this image, which was typical of the Impressionists also. It's not a posed scene, although there's still compositional choices. But again, we see just this laying in of color. We have very loose brush strokes. We don't have a ton of detail. It's more of an impression of what you see. Next, we're going to talk about Edgar Degas. This is the star. And again, we have those loose brush strokes. We're going to talk about loose brush strokes a whole lot. I'm so sorry. We talked about Degas when we discussed drawing. We talked about some of his sketches of ballerinas, but that's what he's known for. He's known for painting ballerinas. His images are drawn for real life, but they are created scenes. He sees things in real life, takes a sketch, and then sort of edits and composes them to make something new in the painting. He cared more about the feel of the scene rather than the perfect portrayal of the event. We have sort of a blurred, chaotic effect happening in the background and around things. We still see elements off the stage, but we don't have like a defined area here. Like, is it a curtain? Is it some sort of prop? Is it meant to be some kind of foliage? We don't really know. It's very blurred because that's not what's important. What's important is for you to see the star on the stage and the people in the background. And next we have Auguste Rodin. This is the thinker. It's important to note that many of the styles, again, were overlapping. So we have this view back. We have neoclassicism happening at the same time that we have Impressionist painting. So here we see a little bit of that overlap. So Rodin was looking back to some of the unfinished sculptures by Michelangelo as inspiration for his texture in this sculpture and a lot of his other sculptures at the time. And although Michelangelo is a Renaissance painter and sculptor, Michelangelo was also looking back to the classical Greek and Roman sculptures. So we have that classicism, we have that, we have this sort of painterly effect. We have this rough texture, unfinished almost feeling texture that lends to that impressionist feel. But then we have sort of this idealized muscular sculpture that we've seen in Greek and Roman art and then again in the Renaissance. It's a bronze, so that leans back to the Greeks, and again, we're coming back into the Renaissance. Rodin worked with an additive process. He built up the image with clay or wax and then cast it in bronze. It's the classical nude. It's in a position of contemplation, showing the introspective qualities of the Impressionist style. So Rodin's goal was to make the viewer feel emotion similar to the Impressionist paintings while being a sculpture. This sculpture was originally named The Poet and was meant to be part of a sculptural door surround called The Gates of Hell. But now it exists on its own. Now we're going to talk about post-impressionism. So again, post-impressionists were working at the same time that impressionists were working. Post-impressionists were not all working with the same style, but rather different styles inspired by the impressionists. So post-impressionist art, all of it's looking back to the impressionists, but not all of it looks similar or the same. It's more of an interpretation of Impressionist art by different people. So this is Paul Cézanne's Mont Sainte-Victoire. Cézanne used a color scheme that he called modulation to lay color on the canvas. He placed colors side by side to create gradation. It's rumored that Cézanne once said, "If you see a color, paint it," when talking about painting and his use of colors. So again, we see those complementary colors. We see oranges. We have analogous colors alongside complementary. So we have touches of orange in the blue. We have touches of red in the green. We have touches of blue in the orange. So, but they're all just kind of laid in together. They're not really blended. And again, the loose brush strokes. We're going to talk about that all the time. I'm so sorry. Now, one of our loosest brush strokes, Vincent van Gogh's. This is his Wheat Field with Crows. So Van Gogh painted this painting and others like it near the end of his life. It's recorded that Van Gogh committed suicide, but today people believe that his death was actually an accident. He was living with his doctor in the country at the time, and on the day of his death, his doctor left to go to the city for the day. Van Gogh had been painting this painting and other paintings like it for the Wheat Field with Crows, sunflowers, that sort of thing. He would go out into the field with his gun and the paint that he had. It's recorded that he would fire his gun in the air to get the crows to fly up out of the tall grass. Eventually they would come back, but that's how he sort of got their movement in painting down, was by scaring them out of the grass. Putting his medical history and this information together, modern scholars theorize that he might have had a seizure that made him accidentally fire the gun. He didn't die instantly. He made it back to the house where he fell asleep while bleeding out. His doctor found him there hours later and tried to heal him, but eventually, days later, he passed away from blood loss from the gunshot. So, I know, really sad. Van Gogh went through a lot. But this painting displays the texture and style typical of Van Gogh. We've seen this before. We've seen it with Starry Night. We've seen it with Cafe at Night. It's those loose brush strokes. It's contrasting colors. It's this dynamic composition that captures your eye. But this is all inspired by the Impressionists. So it's post-Impressionists. Even then, nobody paints like Van Gogh. Now a friend of Van Gogh's, Gauguin. They actually were friends. That's real. So this is a painting by Gauguin. It's one of the many that he created while in Tahiti. It's where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? I ask myself these questions all the time as well, Gauguin. Gauguin went looking for a new life and thought the exoticism of Tahiti would be a good adventure. He abandoned his wife and son to travel to Tahiti, where he married a native woman. Gauguin was influenced by the Impressionist use of color and depictions of everyday people and scenes. He created compositions depicting the people of Tahiti in their everyday dress. Sometimes, like in the case of this image, he depicts the people in more European scenes rather than a scene in which they might actually be in. So this scene is said to be inspired by this painting. This one dates from 1890. This one's 1897. So this is Chauvenet, between art and nature. So we see people milling about again. Neoclassicism. So we have water, we have architecture in the background, we have people doing everyday things. And then back at Gauguin's, we have architecture in the background. We have people doing everyday things. Even this person reaching up. We see this person reaching up here. So, but we see, like, if you see a color, paint it. So we have these blues, which would be in shadow. We see golds on the skin because would be a warmer color. And next we have Edward Munch. This is The Scream. Munch recalled they had been out for a walk at sunset when suddenly the setting sun's light turned the clouds a blood red. He sensed an infinite scream passing through nature. Munch created multiple versions of this painting, including 2 paintings, 2 drawings in pastel, and lithograph prints. We can see the typical post-impressionist use of line and color in this scene, although we see a bit more abstraction than we've seen before. So again, loose brush strokes. We have those complementary colors. If we see a color, we paint it again. Then we have this abstraction with this curving of the figure, this elongation of the face and the mouth. We still lack a lot of detail. Our proportions are correct for these people, but our proportions are not correct for this man screaming. But again, looking back to the Impressionists. So that is it for part 1. So this is late 18th and 19th century, and we'll talk about the 20th century in our next part.